This week on Dig Me Out.
Atmosphere is crystal clear, no clouds in the sky. Burn up or down, draw in or out.
With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. See, that would have been a lot cooler if we always said it like that before. Like every time you say .com, you go .com.
You're reminding me of the early 2000s when everybody had to have a .com.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of the answer to everything. Like, just set up a .com.
Pets.com.
I have a business idea. Let's just set up a website and people will come to it.
It's so easy. Website, money, intermediate step, who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We've got to talk about music, Jay. We can't go too far off tangent because that's not what this show is about. This show is about talking about music and talking about music with our patrons quite often. And just so happens that we have a patron joining us for this episode. You might know him from previous episodes, such as last year's Tantrum by Melk, 2022's Derailer by Little John, 2021's Are You Normal by Ned's Atomic Dustbin, 2020's In Thrall by Murray Attaway, and 2020's American Highway Flower by Dada. It's Dada, right? Dada. It's Dada. Dada.
DA.
Yes. Where is the emphasis on that? Is it okay? Never mind. This is stupid. Also been in a number of roundtables like Dinosaur Jr. B-sides, album of the 90s, and Sophomore Slump Reversed. Welcome back to the program, Cincinnati's own right fielder, Jeremy Amend.
Thank you.
How you doing, Jeremy?
How'd you know I played right field in Little League?
Because I did.
Yeah, that's where they put us.
That's where they put us.
Yeah.
It was actually high school. I played one inning of right field in high school, and the rest of the time I was on the bench. But for the senior game, when the seniors all played, I got to play one inning in the outfield because I was
out there.
I was the bookkeeper for the whole season. I was the guy who like wrote in like, had the little diamond on with the book, and you'd etch that all in. Yep. My stats that year were 0 for 3 with a throwing error because I had one ball hit to me in right field, and it was I overthrew second base, so I got a throwing error.
Oh, Tim.
Yeah. I never even had a ball come to me. So especially where I lived and my generation, a lot of the left-handed kids were getting it, beat out of them by nuns and whatnot, told they got it right with their right hand. And so they threw and batted with their right hand. And I sat out there in right field. And if anybody ever hit it opposite field, it didn't go that far. So
you're just sitting picking grass. That's what we did in
Pretty
Little
much.
League. Is you just sit and like pick grass. Like, oh, nobody's gonna hit it to me. Especially in Little League when you had 4 outfielders, they would put like 4 kids out there, be left center and right center.
Mm-hmm.
That was the
Humble brag.
You
I don't
had
know.
a bad team if that was.
I don't know about you guys, but I played first base. I don't know what your problem was.
Well, look
Somebody
at
saw
Paul
you do the
Sorrento
splits
over
once.
here.
Yeah.
And batted cleanup.
Batted
Paul
cleanup.
Sorrento.
That was my boy on the Bisons. You batted cleanup,
yeah.
and you were a star running back in high school. Jay was quite he was a double threat. How many touchdowns did you score that game, Jay?
1,000.
4?
I wish I would have played baseball longer.
So you
That's actually a sport you can play. Like, well, that would probably, help give me something to do over the summer, but it's also a sport as an adult you can actually play, unlike football.
Right.
Which is kind of a bad idea to play if you're over the age of, or not being paid to do it.
You know, to be fair, there's a tiny little bit of baseball involved in this particular episode,
I
right?
guess we'll have to get to it.
That was one of my questions to Rick Valentin. So if I
Okay,
get a chance, I might bring that up.
please do. That's right. You spoke with. Well, let's get to the album, please. Jeremy, share with the audience the album you have brought for this episode.
This is 1997's RTFM by Poster Children, their last major label album.
Released on Reprise Records, April of 1997. It was an enhanced CD when it was released.
Oh,
So what was the
fairly
enhancement?
Well, I'm fairly certain it's the only enhanced CD at that time that was actually created by the band. They didn't pay somebody else to do it. And it's I wish I could get it to play, but I need like a Windows 95 machine with a very old version of Macromedia to get it to work. But
Oh,
when you ran it, it basically, if I recall correctly, it brings you to the front of a building. They modeled the idea of the building was modeled after, I'm trying to remember what the building was, but you go into this building, it's got a lot of glass in the entryway, so you can see into the foyer or whatever, and then you kind of navigate. You click to go through the door, and it plays music as you're navigating to different places, if I recall correctly. And you can go to different floors and down hallways and into different rooms and just see a variety of videos. Some kind of like behind the scenes stuff, in the studio, and then some. I think they had like a couple legitimate like videos, or at least like music video segments in it as well. I mean, it was. I felt like at the time it was probably one of the more engaging enhanced CDs that have been created. And I mean, if we get a chance, I can get into what they said about the creation of that. But yeah, it was. I was able to pull probably about a tenth of the videos off of it to watch them recently, but most of them played at like double speed and had like a clipping on them. But yeah, I asked on their
what was the
Discord,
resolution?
like, hey, do you guys have like any? It's small. I mean, it's really, really tiny. I mean, think
Yeah.
about monitors and Windows
Right.
right before Windows 98 came out. So
It's like
very,
watching
very
a
pixelated.
postage stamp.
Pretty much. I mean,
Yeah.
it's you can make it larger on the screen, but it's you're not gonna be able to make anything out. So
there needs to
Sure.
be a website that collects the content of enhanced CDs and it's just and like upscales it so that you can actually watch all the stuff. Jay, can you get on that?
It's all you'd have to do is buy a Macromedia, either Flash. Oh, well, you'd have to build a Flash and Director emulator, because I'm sure that's what all those are built in. Which
well, I'll tell you, actually,
would be a nightmare.
He only wrote a sentence or two on it. So I'll just tell you that what Rick had said about that, because I had asked about the decision to make an enhanced CD, and if the label had pressured them or encouraged them to make it. And he said, I remember it being a band decision. There had been a few interactive enhanced CDs, The Residents, David Bowie, and I think Soundgarden, built by fledgling multimedia companies. And we wanted to do something like that. And we brought it up at lunch with the label folks, who were actually pretty cool, Howie Klein and the alternative marketing crew. And they said, yeah, that's a great idea. You should do that. And I was thinking we'd team up with one of those multimedia companies to build it on the label's dime. But Howie Klein said, you guys are programmers. You should just do it. And that's how it happened.
You can provide the free labor and content.
Right. We'll be happy to make money off of that.
Sure, you'll get a good exposure from it.
I think Rose probably did most of the heavy lifting on that, if not all of it. I mean, she's really. I think both Rick and Rose are, but I mean, Rose is like really into a variety of programming languages. Like she geeks out about that stuff a lot. So I think I'd have to go back and read her book, but I think that she did a lot of that, a lot of this. Like the band weighed in on some of the stuff that they wanted, but I think that she did the actual coding and building it out and all that.
So people might or might not know that we've already done an episode on the Poster Children, except it was for the exclusive Patreon community. It was one of our aughts episodes from last year. We did the album, which is called Songs About Something.
No more. No more songs about sleep and fire.
No more songs about sleep and fire.
It's actually right
over
there.
I see it up there. Yes. They decreed that there would be no more songs about sleep and fire, and there were none after that.
Except there's a little asterisk. There's a what song is it? Midnight Sun. There's one of the songs on the album where there's like an asterisk and it says may contain a passing reference to fire, I think. So it's kind of like we said we wouldn't do any songs about sleep and fire, but then we snuck one in kind of.
We were joking. We were jokesters. So we're not going to do a full history of the band because we already did that. If you'd like to hear it, you can join us at Patreon to listen to that episode. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Say no more.
But for this particular album, the lineup, which is this to be described as maybe like a consistent lineup for them?
This is their sixth drummer, Howie, and if you go by years, he's the second longest tenured drummer in the band. If you go by
Spinal
albums,
Tap thing going on.
Well, yeah, but the funny thing, if you go by albums, Howie has done the most, I believe, and also Howie was a drummer for Salaryman, their other band, and he continues to be the drummer for Salaryman, although they haven't recorded anything in a long time, but they've done some shows, and Howie's still the drummer for that, which kind of makes sense. I feel like the style for that stuff works better for Howie's style than for Matt's anyway. But I mean, I'm sure Matt could do it. I mean, I feel like he could do anything, but
right.
Yeah. So yeah, this is probably the lineup that most Poster Children fans think of when they think of the band.
Got it. So as you mentioned, Rick Valentin on vocals and guitar. His brother Jim is also on guitar. Rose, who you mentioned, Rose Marshak, is on bass and vocals, and Howie Kantoff on drums. They produced the album with Bryce Goggin, who's the producer and engineer on this record. As mentioned, he came out in Reprise. And what was it? There was something. Oh, the term or the acronym RTFM. That stands for Read the Fucking Manual.
You get one. This stays PG-13.
Yeah, we're just PG-13. And a fun fact, one of the bands they supported on tour around this time was Failure, who we have talked about here and there on the podcast. So let's get to comments over at Patreon, because obviously we don't need to talk about whether we know this band or not, because we've already talked about this band. So Jay and I are familiar, unless Jay suffered some sort of amnesiatic episode that I was not aware of and has lost all of his memories regarding Poster Children. I don't think that's the case. Is it?
It could happen.
It could happen. Any day one of us could just wake up.
I mean, we're sort of at that age where you just never know every day when you get up.
Right. Or you wake up and your hair's all white like Steve Martin. You're just like, what? My hair's all white. How'd that happen?
Or that. Yep.
So Gavin said, I had the album previous to this one, and while I liked it, it's not something I go back to. I like the music. The vocals don't work for me, though, especially now. Makes it sound like they're joking. EP for me. Interesting. Okay. Willie Dillon. I'm a big fan of Poster Children, though I've never determined which album of theirs is my favorite. That being said, this one is great. And really, the only track I'd leave off is Music of America. Otherwise, it's a very solid album that's mostly on their louder side and has some good dynamics, great songwriting, and good production that keeps things interesting. Oh for One is probably my favorite song on the album, with some cool little guitar bits and bobs. Worthy album, of course. Patrick Testa. Such a great album. It has some major label guitar movements, but nothing more than we got from the Lemonheads. And I hear influences by Devo and Gang of Four on this record. Okay. Richard Waterman, my favorite Poster Children album, and their best in my opinion. Starts off really strong with Black Dog. It's so heavy. It's a triumphant feel. It has a triumphant feel in that it is about overcoming depression. Then 0 for 1 is a great track to follow up with its chiming guitar intro. Jay is going to love the guitars on this album. Lots of really cool guitar ideas and playing. There are a ton of hooks too, especially Speed of Light and King of the Hill. The album sounds great. It has an analog feel. The album could have been one of the best of the mid 90s if it was a 10-track album. I would remove Music for America and Afterglow. Still a worthy album, though. They toured with Failure on this record, and it has a worthy enhanced CD. Keith Preston said, I love the fuzzy guitars and snarling vocals. I was already a fan of Tool the Man, which is an earlier album of theirs. I guess I should have investigated the Poster Children a little further. Definitely a worthy album. Also, I was today years old when I found out this band wasn't from England.
Oh, wow.
And Ian McIver said, I am sure Jeremy picked a worthy album for the Union. However, this album did not click with me. I feel bad as Jeremy often has my back on the Discord, but I have to go with my vote. A shiny drink coaster, if it was an option. Decent single. And then you mentioned Salaryman, which is the keyboard instrumental project, and Ian was on board with that. So if each band that we talk about would just do an instrumental side project, Ian would be on board with you guys. I'm just saying. That's his wheelhouse. Do some instrumentals, some bleeps and bloops,
Keyboards.
that kind of stuff. Keyboards. Run things through emulators and synthesizers and synthesize emulators, that sort of thing.
And loop it.
And, photosynthesis, whatever you got to do to make a good record for Ian to enjoy. Those are our comments over at Patreon. Let's get into the record. Jay, tell me, what works for you on RTFM by Poster Children?
It's a big bombastic sound on this record. It walks this line between, I guess, what I would describe as like late 90s post-hardcore style guitars and energy, and some of the skill involved there too with the drumming. But it's very accessible. There's this layer of, I guess, melody and accessibility, and that's on top of it. Some of the songs even lean into, being pretty much pop songs, which was unexpected. A lot of that is because I think the bass tone and playing is just epic. Like, it's so big and beefy, and it's got that grinding edge to it. So it's like full, and it can be edgy and kind of, dark at times. It really does a great job filling in a lot of space for the guitars. The guitars are great. I think a lot of that, though, has to do with the fact that, there's just so much being filled up in the middle by the bass that the guitars can do really interesting stuff, unique leads. Even some of the chord progressions are just hooky in themselves. A simple, clean guitar, a progression in 0 for 1. It's really hooky and melodic.
I dress for success, but success is not impressed when I strike. I strike out when I swing. I walk, drop a hint, drop a line. What's your number? What's your sign? No matter how hard I try, I don't get a bite. Oh for one, oh for two, oh for three, oh for 4, 5, 6.
Usually like that clean guitar part, just like whatever, it's something you sing over. But like that's a good example of like when you really listen to that, that's coming back and really providing a lot of the hook and underlying melody in that song. it reminded me a lot, and I don't remember making this comment when we listened to the 2000s album, which we liked a lot too. But it reminded me a lot of the band Criteria and their band before that, the White Octave, which there's not a lot of bands that sound like those bands. Um, but it's got that like this kind of triumphant, positive energy to it that's not, but it's big and heavy and has depth. And usually, to get when you head in that direction, trying to be that big and bombastic and heavy at times, it starts to automatically just sound like angry and angsty. And this band doesn't sound angry and angsty. It's this really cool, like almost anthemic feel to it, and dynamic nature that is really like kind of rare. That's why I'm bringing up that band Criteria, which I think they were in a similar vein, in the way their songs came across. It just had this, I don't know, this really interesting kind of positive feel to it that was still had depth, which is something I gravitate to. So that's, largely what worked for me. How about you, Tim?
Well, like you, who enjoyed the other album that we did, I think I was caught off guard a little bit by like how big this sounds from the guitars and how creative and interesting. I remember liking that album and being sort of caught off guard. Oh, I didn't like, this is a band I've heard people talk about and I've just never got into them. And like, now, why didn't I check them out? Like, what was holding me back? And then I didn't do anything beyond that album. And now we're coming to another album and I'm like, wow, I really like this. People talk about this band and I've never really checked anything out except for that one record. Maybe I should check out more than one record. And what's interesting about this one is, like you said, like it's just enormous sounding. It's at times. Dream Small, like you mentioned about Criteria, that has that. There's something in the guitar tone of that. I don't know what it is, but it's on that particular song. There's a guitar effect or something that just gives it a little bit of a flavor that's not just straight up distortion. There's or fuzz. There's just like a little bit of something going on in there. It's like that throughout the record. There's always something really cool happening with the guitars or with the way that they're being used. The opening track, Black Dog, is such a great punch in the face because you're sort of like, when is this song going to start? Is this like oh my God, it just hits you with this enormous, after being all quiet for a minute.
Pulls you in.
It's a total fake out, and it's great. And you get that. I know people mention Music of America as a song that they like would want to remove from the album. I get that it's a little high energy and almost over the top, but man, those guitar lines, those cascading guitar lines, like those are so cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of thing that I think of this band as like a Midwestern indie rock band. So I don't think of leads a lot of the time, or when I do think of leads, they tend to be, just a couple of notes that are really well placed. But I don't think of bands like shredding, which is essentially what's kind of happening. And it's not in the Yngwie or the Yngwie mold of shredding, but there's definitely like some guitar riffage happening on this record. And you also get some great stuff from Rose Marshak, King of the Hill. That bass line, that groove in that song, that's something that like every band wants to have. You want to find that like killer groove that you can just like ride, but it's not a jam. You know what I mean? It's the difference between like a jam band just like riding on a one note for or a couple notes, whereas this has got this like urgency to it, and you know something's going to happen at some point, and then they finally do. But it's such a great little bass groove that the guitars also lock into.
Sidewind the car through the mountains, taking photos of the sky. The radio is low and it's so difficult to focus through the static and the snow, yeah. Scouting out locations, looking for a destination where I can be reached by telephone, yeah. King of the hill, test of the will, straight from the ground.
That to me is like, that is the honey of this. Like, just keep giving me more of that. Cool riffs from the guitars, cool riffs from the bass. And then, you know, Rick Valentin is coming up with some really odd and strange ways of turning hooks on this. You know, 0 for 1, I was not expecting that to be sort of an earworm. And then I was kind of like, what the hell is he? What is he? What's going on in this? Oh, I guess it's cool. Like, I'm not going to figure it out, but I guess it's going to get in my head. So that's what's going to happen. And it's like that on a lot of the record, where there's just like things happening that are unexpected, but he has a delivery that's like, and this is meant with total love. Like if Fred Schneider was in a punk band, that's what it sounds like to me. So, and I love Fred Schneider. I love the B-52s, but he's in that range, that nasally sort of range of Fred Schneider. And so I can understand why some people will be like, oh, his voice is a little bit goofy. But it's so energetic and fun that I kind of don't care. I just let it go. So that's some of the stuff that worked for me. Jeremy, you brought this to us. So what works for you on this record?
Honestly, it's probably my favorite record from them. I'm not sure. I mean, I vacillate, but Poster Children is probably the only band I've ever gotten into where the very first album that I got from them is the one that I probably like the least. But it was enough for me to, like, I had heard the name, like in the early 90s, mid 90s, I had heard the name, but it wasn't until 99 that I bought New World Record because I heard 6x6 on 97X. And, you know, I liked the album. You know, I listened to it for a little while, but then I was like, you know, maybe I'll check out some other stuff from them. And I believe this was the next album that I got. And when I heard Black Dog, I was like, I've heard this. I heard this on 97X. And that's when I had heard somebody mention Poster Children. So then I went back and I got Junior Citizen, and I heard Junior Citizen, and I was like, I've heard this. I started finding it was you know, it was just a great experience, like going back through, and like I went back probably 3 or 4 albums and was still hearing stuff. So I was like, I remember hearing this on the radio. And so now I was thinking about this the other day. I'm like, you know, this might, it's odd. This might be my favorite. It's odd that it's followed up by what might be my least favorite. And then that's followed up by what might contend for one of my most favorite. It's a really weird period for the band. But I would say for this, I mean, everything that you guys are talking about totally works for me. I don't really care about voices typically. I mean, like Dave Matthews doesn't bother me. So if that tells you how much I don't care about voices, I mean, I'm like, you know, okay, you know, the delivery's a little quirky, but that's fine. I think that what he has to say in his lyrics most of the times how he delivers it, and just some of the hooks. It makes it all work for me. And the vocals, if I sat there and focused on the vocals, maybe I could be like, oh yeah, I could see how somebody would be bothered by this, but I've never been bothered by these. Don't even come close to vocals that would bother me as far as timbre or anything like that. I'm totally fine with it. I think it's perfect for what they're doing and the lyrics that are being delivered.
It does work really well because it cuts through everything. His voice being higher, you have all this stuff happening with the guitars and the bass eating up a lot of the, as Jay mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of range that's getting chewed up by all that. So his voice really does need to be higher to stand out.
It is with great urgency that we bring you these following messages.
Most people think they know all they need to know about Christian rock.
Whether you think it's cheesy propaganda pretending to be cool,
or if you think it's the only pop music unsullied by worldly vices,
you'll find something to love on Rock That Doesn't Roll.
I'm Leah Payne, author of A History of Contemporary Christian Music.
And I'm Andrew Gill, a public radio producer who grew up on Christian rock.
On Rock That Doesn't Roll, we're talking with people who loved Christian rock in its peak era and learning how it affected them as they grew up.
Listen to Rock That Doesn't Roll wherever you get your podcasts.
The 1990s. My very favorite decade, especially for music. This is Dope Nostalgia, and I'm your host, Naomi Carmack. And every week, we revisit the era that brought us Hammer Pants, Crystal Pepsi, Pogs, Hypercolor, Pokemon, and some of the greatest songs of all time. On Dope Nostalgia, not only do I have episodes where I talk about the big artists of the 90s with friends, but sometimes those big artists come on the show. Past guests include Naughty by Nature, George Lamond, Alana Miles, Color Me Bad, Biff Naked, Ed the Sock, Shakespeare's Sister, Two Unlimited, The Funky Bunch, Technotronic, Rosala, Tara Kemp, Mr. Big, Honeymoon Suite, Right Said Fred, and so many more. You can always leave us a voicemail and tell us what you think, and we'll play it on the show. 780-851-8785. Dope Nostalgia, a podcast made for 90s kids like me. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, Podbean, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are served.
You mentioned about, I guess, emailing with Rick.
Yeah.
So can you shed some light on 0 for 1? Did he give you anything on that?
Well, the only thing that I asked him about was, I said, I know you're not a big fan of sports. Is the ubiquity of sports terminology, especially that of baseball, an accidental influence on your lyrics for 0 for 1? Was there a bit of humorous irony intended there? And he just simply said, clumsy sports analogies fit nicely with lyrics from the nerd perspective. It's like, yeah, that was probably the shortest answer that he gave of anything that I asked him about. But I just always, when I hear that song, I just always think like, I mean, I know he's familiar with sports terminology, but I know he's not a big fan of organized sports. I don't think he had a lot of friends, considering his generation. There's probably a lot more division in high school.
Sure.
Where like the jocks are kind of their thing, and he's overdoing his thing. So, a little bit different for us, maybe, but I can totally get it. Just watching people play sports probably would primarily remind you of people that were jerks or bullies in school. That's for certain.
They needed more people like Jay, who was the bridge between the jocks and the music nerds.
Well, there was more of that in our generation.
I think so.
Our end of the generation than their end of the generation. I guess we're all Generation X, but yes. I feel like we're at the tail end of that. So
right. Like I had people in my high school who played sports, but then were also like smoking weed behind the school and listening to Guns N' Roses and Ministry and Megadeth and stuff. And you're like, those people are weird. They're doing too much. You got to pick a lane. You can't do all that stuff.
You mentioned, I'm trying to clear this up here so I can find it. You were talking about Dream Small. Mm-hmm. I did ask about that, but I didn't really get into the actual guitar tones of it. What I had asked about was kind of that large tom boom, in that song. There's like a little bit of just regular sounding drums, but then there's just really loud, like big tom boom in the drums. I don't know if you remember.
It's in the left channel.
Yeah, and it's like boom, it's just super loud, and it's through the whole thing. And so I asked him about that, and then also about how the bass was being done, because like the first bass note is really low and buzzy, and then the rest of it is a little bit more clear. And it's like every time that they drop down to that low note, it just has a different sound to it than the rest of it. And so what he had said was that they had done a demo recording of it, and he said Bryce liked the heavy Beatles compression I had done on the demo recording for Dream Small, so he slammed the room mics on the drums. That can cause the toms to really explode, and the same thing for bass. I think it's just super compressed and the lower tones are popping out. I believe Rose used a Boss heavy metal distortion on her bass for that one. The drums are also a loop. Bryce had an early multi-track digital setup and tracked the drums on tape, digitized a section, looped it, and printed back to tape. Not a big deal these days, but back then it was somewhat of an involved process.
Oh yeah. In the mid 90s, yeah. That wasn't something you could just do easily. I noticed there is quite a bit of, like, on 21st Century, I think is another good example where, like, it seems like the whole mix has distortion on it. Like his voice has distortion on it. The guitars are like almost direct in sounding. I think the drums might have some some distortion on it. Like it is a hot mix on that sound. Yes. It reminded me of what's oddly, it reminded me of the bands in the early 2000s that were doing like the dance punk thing that was sounding like Gang of Four from the 70s. And Patrick brought up Gang of Four, and I could definitely hear that sort of a post-punk influence. I think they referred to it as post-new wave is part of their sound. Like they have a new wave influence, but even later than that. Did you happen to, in terms of your questions, was there anything with regards to the overall sort of like approach to mixing or how they were capturing stuff?
No, not really. I had asked about Bryce Goggin as the engineer and mixer of choice for this, and I felt dumb when I got the answer, because I realized, like, oh yeah, he is in, he was the mixer on Junior Citizen, so it kind of made sense. But I guess he said that they had him do like a test mix of the song New Boyfriend for Junior Citizen. And he said that he had pulled it out of Incoherence. So they were pretty sold on him in the future. And so he wasn't brought on initially as the producer for this album. I guess there's a guy named, where do I have it here? Mark Rubel was actually engineering it with them, but I guess it fell apart. And so they asked Bryce to come in and produce an engineer based on what he had done with Junior Citizen. They said that they were trying to find it here. They said that Bryce had the ability to take indie rock up a notch sonically while still maintaining the indie energy. For RTFM, we started recording and producing the album ourselves with Mark Rubel engineering, but it kind of fell apart. We asked Bryce to come in and produce engineer based on his track record with Junior Citizen. I don't remember getting suggestions from the label for producers, although I have a vague memory of Howie Klein making a suggestion along the lines of, hear me out, don't say no immediately. What about Ted Templeman? Sorry, which at the time I was like, what? But now I'm like, that might have been really cool. But I'm sure it wasn't a realistic notion. Also, I think our A&R guy asked if you could get any producer, who would it be? And I said Brian Eno, and he went, not an old guy, someone young and cool. So that's kind of how they arrived.
Oh my God.
On Bryce.
Who cares if they're old? You get the people who create an interesting sound and bring out things in a band that they didn't even know that they could do.
A&R people, they don't really know what they're talking about.
Who is the metal guy that we always talk about, Jay, on the 80s metal podcasts?
Michael Wagner?
Yeah, she got Michael Wagner.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want a band to pick a producer that's not from their genre. Like, get somebody who doesn't belong. Like, get some jazz producer and see what they do to it.
Ted Templeman would have been a fun listen.
That would have been an interesting choice. Did he do stuff that was not like sort of mainstream rock? Did he do anything that was indie rock?
Oh, so he did mention um, Joe McEwen. Let's see, their A&R guy, Joe McEwen, was pretty cool. Okay, so the A&R, Joe McEwen, is who also signed Uncle Tupelo and Aphex Twin Desire, had heard Bryce Goggins' mixes of Pavement's Wowie Zowie, I think before the record was out, and suggested him to remix Junior Citizen and the Just Like You EP, which he did. Bryce had and then, what I said before. So that's how they kind of hooked up with him. But I mean, I had no idea that he had done, I guess it's been a long time since I read the liner notes for Wowie Zowie, but that I could understand this band hearing that this guy worked on that album and automatically being like, yeah, that's that we want him involved in this. But it doesn't really say much about I mean, there are a few mentions here and there of I think he mentions a couple of things about techniques, but I can't remember where it is. I'm trying to like black out the stuff that I've already mentioned, so I'm not going back to mention it here. But I'm failing to do that miserably. Yeah, I don't think that there's anything specifically about. I think the only other real mention about Bryce is that he's probably the only non-member to ever get caught and have his voice caught on tape, which is at the beginning of man, why am I drawing a blank on this? At the beginning of Speed of Light, when he says, this is Speed of Light, take 6, and that's Bryce Goggin that's saying that. It gets, caught on a hot mic, I guess. But yeah, nothing really about. I mean, they loved him. They loved working with him on this, and I mean, I think he did a phenomenal job. But they don't say much about. I didn't ask a lot about the production either. I tried to focus more on the sounds and the lyrics and the packaging than anything else. So, kind of my bad.
Just for the people out there who are interested, Bryce Goggin also has worked with Apples in Stereo, Swans, Evan Dando, Sean Lennon, Sebado, Band of Susans, Space Hog, Skeleton Key, who we've talked about on this podcast, Betty Seviert. He's worked on a Ramones record. I don't know if that was a producer or as an engineer. And he worked also on. So the first thing he ever worked on was he mixed Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. So what was that, before or after Wowie Zowie?
That was before. That was the album right before Wowie Zowie. Their big album, I guess. And oddly, this kind of sacrilege amongst Pavement fans, and I consider myself a Pavement fan. I think that Wowie Zowie is a way more interesting album than Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain. Crooked Rain, Crooked Rain is probably the least listened to album for me from Pavement. So putting that out there.
Well, I have no opinions on Pavement.
Oh, I know.
Someone would have
competition between Pavement and Seaweed.
We haven't talked about Pavement on the podcast, and quite honestly, it's been a very long time since I've listened to them. Maybe my opinion would change, but my opinion has not changed in a long time about them.
About
anything. I've been locked in for 30 years on every idea I've ever had.
I mean, let's be honest, most humans are like that.
Sure. No, I've come around on mustard. I like mustard now. I used to hate mustard. Now I like mustard. So people can change. Jay, if I can change and you can change.
You can change.
Everybody can change. And like mustard.
Back to sports.
Yes. Jay, what doesn't work for you on this record?
I'm going to go back to the vocal. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. There are times I love it. I think it works great. There are other times where it does bring me to that Fred Schneider B-52s place. And I try to figure out like what songs, what's going on, why at times am I really enjoying the vocal and why at other times am I kind of being repelled by it. I did notice the stuff that's maybe a little bit like Music of America and 21st Century, for example. Those two songs to me feel like the most straightforward attempts at trying to write pop songs.
21st century. 21st century. In the 21st century. The homeless were a nuisance to the 5 o'clock commuters, so they were erased from the streets. Apocalyptic rumors are consumed by the consumers. There's a new disease every week. The nightly news has no more room for truth inside the narrow cast. The market slips, a panic hits as the fever spreads across the land. Genetic is generic, what's different than neglecting? Copyright your DNA.
I noticed in those songs the vocal really was over the top in terms of the pronunciation and sort of, that style. So I like those songs. I think it's interesting they went in that direction for them. I think if those songs were on other albums, I probably would think they're good songs. So I'm not going to say they're not, but I think it just brought that what I don't like about his vocal approach, it really pronounced it on those two tracks. And then there's a couple other moments here and there on the record where it happens as well, but I felt like in those songs everything else is like louder and weirder, and the vocal kind of fits better. And when they're being high energy or like trying to be dancy, it just makes more space for me to focus on the vocal. So, and I don't remember making that comment or being critical about on it on the 2000s album that we reviewed, but it really more popped on this one. That's my really only nitpick. How about you, Tim?
Same. I feel like the difference between this record and that record, this feels like you spend more time in the up tempo mode than the other record. There was a lot of rocking on that record, but it didn't feel like we were as up tempo as much. And like Music of America is a good example. I like the music on that song, but I feel like his vocal gets a little over the top. Just in terms, it's not even really the tone of his voice. It's just I don't like the way it's structured, and it just kind of is rat-a-tat-tat, and
it feels a little novelty.
Yeah.
Like a presence in the United States or something like that. Like it made me start to think of some of the novelty hits of the late 90s that didn't fit this band very well.
The other time where I thought it was a little odd was at the beginning of Sleep. It's just him and I think a guitar, and
yeah,
it's kind of sing-songy in a way. It's a lot of enunciation. It's very clear.
Yeah,
and it reminded me of, it almost was like not the lyrics, but just like the way he was delivering it. It was like a kid's song.
Yeah.
He has like a very happy voice
Mm-hmm.
in a way, and so it just didn't match, especially where the song goes, which is much bigger. It just seemed like an odd part that stuck out to me. It was one of those things where I could listen to this record and just sort of like rock out, and nothing pulled me into it, like in a way that made me distracted. And then when it got to that, I was like, this weird one again. It's not that long, and it's not enough to make me like hate the song. It was just like, this is has two, there's it's drawing attention, and I don't like what it's drawing attention to.
Yep.
So besides that, I mean, musically, I like every single song in this record. It's just a couple vocal parts where it does get so nasally and up front that I kind of would probably mix it a little bit differently. But it sounds, I mean, still sounds great, but that's my only nitpick. Jeremy, anything with you? I know it's your favorite album by the band, so
I'm not on board with cutting any tracks from this. I mean, it's what, 45 minutes, 48, something like that, I think. Um, and I think for the most part, the sequencing is really awesome. There's somewhere between King of the Hill and Pearly Gates, somewhere in that range. So what is that? Track 6 through 10. Sometimes when I'm listening to it, I wish it was sequenced a little bit differently. But I mean, it's nothing like. Sometimes I'm perfectly fine with it, but sometimes I listen to it, I'm just like, man, I wish these tracks were just shaken up just a little bit. And I'd asked him a little bit about the sequencing, but I mean, mainly, if Black Dog had always been intended to be the opener, and he said he thought that it's an obvious opener, and then Happens Every Day is at the end, or as the end kind of creates a loop, starting the album with feedback and ending the album with weird guitar arpeggios. So they were, they tried to think of it as 5 or 6 songs per side, which they say they do, he does on every record. And then, so 21st Century was meant to be the B-side opener. And so it said the fiddling on the sequencing happens in the in-between tracks. Find an opener, find a closer, and find a side 2 opener, and then fill in the rest. So I just feel like maybe it's that middle of side 2, the middle of the B-side, that I just wish was a little bit different. I love every song. I don't feel like it flows the same way that the first half of the album does. That's the only nitpick that I have really for the whole thing.
Got it. That's an interesting way of looking at it, that even though it's a CD era release, looking at it as 2 sides and thinking of King of the Hill as being the closer and 21st Century as being the opener, the second side, because then it does present it a little bit differently. But I definitely think if you're looking at it that way, the first 6 songs are the stronger than the back 6 songs, just in terms of overall strength. Not to say that there's anything bad or something you want to get rid of, but just if I had to choose a front half or a back half, I'm choosing the front half of that, which is tough because there's some pretty good stuff on the back half too.
Yeah,
like you mentioned, it Happens Every Day. There's some really cool guitar stuff going on throughout that song. So this comes out, like we said, in 97 on a major label. You have any idea of how many records it sold? I would be surprised if it sold 500,000, probably closer to like 100,000. I don't remember them being on radio.
I think the label was at the point, this was this would have been the end of their, as far as their contract goes, I think this would be the last one that the label would be obligated to do with them. But while they had like really nice people in A&R and stuff like that, they still had people at the label that they got along with. I think there were people high up that were kind of like, we shouldn't, this band is established on our, they've done as much as they can do. We're going to do this album and, maybe throw a little bit more budget at it. And then, if they can't break with this, then we don't have to worry about it because we're done with them anyway. And they came under budget on this, under budget enough that they took the remaining money and bought, their own recording equipment because they knew this was the end of their time with a major label distribution. So
smart,
which was like the in vogue in the 90s for a lot of these bands that were thinking
Mm-hmm.
about their future. But yeah, I don't know how many it sold, but I'm sure it wasn't, you know, the greatest. I actually asked if because they've been reissuing their albums, I asked if there was a possibility that this would be reissued. I told him 2027 will be here before we know it. Kind of hitting that 30-year mark. And he mentioned that unfortunately the record is still owned by the brothers Warner, and to do a reissue would involve licensing the record from them, which is prohibitively expensive. Although there is hope with this 35-year rule for copyright reversion to the author, we may get the album back in 2032. And so I told him, it's good to know that there's something to look forward to 8 years from now. Keeps me going, assuming albums with lyrics questioning the government have not been outlawed by our corporate overlords by then. Maybe it'll happen. So, yeah, I would guess this is kind of like this makes me think of DreamWorks and Creeper Lagoon, where they threw I don't know if you ever looked at the credits on that album, but they threw a lot at that. I mean, multiple producers, including Ken Andrews was on there, I think, as producer and mixer. The artwork itself, the melt. No, that's a different DreamWorks album that I'm thinking.
You're thinking of Blink of the Star,
right? But Blink of the Star also had some Ken Andrews involvement. But yeah, they threw, you throw a lot of money at something like that, and then it doesn't break, and then there's kind of like I feel like there's a little bit of bitterness on the label's part, and they're just going to make it as difficult as possible for that band to ever possibly do anything with that music. At least until they're legally obligated to. So, which means I can look forward to finally hearing some of the other recordings for that Creeper Lagoon album in 2036, 2037, something like that. But,
something like that.
Yeah. Same thing. It's just crappy.
I just need to mention that their album covers are a lot. They are constantly putting out on every record of theirs, just a lot of color. Very poster children.
Okay.
Either they go with a very minimalist approach, like DDD, which is a code for, it means a digitally recorded, mixed, and mastered album. But then if you look at Junior Citizen, it's got that bright cartoonish cover with Japanese writing, and then
I think it's Sanskrit. I think it's like a Sanskrit or something like that.
Okay.
For some of that stuff, but yeah, that's Rose's handiwork. I'm sure he's like the little cartoon, like the Space Boy head or whatever. I think that's definitely a logo that Rose came up with. This one is very minimal, though. I mean, the recycled music. And I asked him about that's like my first question. I said, the album artwork for RTFM features a 3/16 note. Was that just a funny little add-on to avoid using a simple eighth note, or is there some hidden meaning or inside joke behind it? And he said, no inside joke. It was just the most aesthetically pleasing note in terms of design. But just putting that additional dot on there.
Just putting that additional dot.
Yeah, add the half value.
I didn't know that that's what that was. So thank you for explaining that. But like, if you look at the Flower Plower, that looks like a 1960s like concert poster. There's
Toreador Squat before that is a paper bag, basically. Brown paper bag. Obviously, because of the name, I guess.
And you mentioned about New World Record, which is the one after this. That was released on Spin Art, and that was one of the first albums released that you could buy as an MP3. Because Spin Art was like one of the first labels to embrace the internet. It was a new label that signed a bunch of like 90s people who didn't have labels anymore, like Frank Black and Michael Penn and who else?
Lotion was on Spin Art.
Yeah, like a lot of artists went and moved there. The Dam Builders. So they were. I remember them being like a big deal for like a short period of time, and then they like went out of business or something. Because you can't make any money in the record business unless you're one of the four majors. So let's get to the overall ratings for this record. Worthy album, better EP, or decent single. Jay, where do you land?
I land at a worthy album. There's a good amount of variety on here. I think there's a lot of layers to it. I think it keeps giving the more you listen to it. It hits me too, like sort of with that positive vibe that it has, where sometimes, I don't know, the age I'm at, I'm not always in the mood to be kind of angry and depressed. So it was an easy listen now at almost 50. So yeah, there's a lot here that I like. So worthy album for me. Where you at, Tim?
Same. I think that this is a really interesting record, in part because I remember a lot of people who were on the indie rock side who championed this band. So I thought they were a little bit more on the Pavement end of things.
Yeah.
I didn't realize they rock this hard. Like normally those people would not have been into a band that rocks as hard as this does. But this is got some big guitars and they're doing some really interesting, not typical indie rock things. When I say indie rock, I'm just thinking of like, a little dissonant guitar lead here and there and sort of warbly vocals. Well, and it's
even things like Afterglow, which is a song I liked a lot. That sounds like the Police. There's this whole other range of this band on this record.
Where's the fire? Time zone rider, force field grinder, two-fist fighter, the great defender. Do you remember the secret shortcut? A twisting tempest, time to make the great escape. One-on-one, face-to-face, caught up in the undertow, set to score before the afterglow.
Than just, it can be big and bombastic, but
right,
you can take these other turns that are a lot of fun too.
Yep. So this is a worthy record, and I honestly would not straight up cut anything. I think there's just a few things I would adjust here and there, but it moves pretty quick. None of these songs are like over 5 minutes, I think. I mean, it's tight. So, and a lot of them are in the like 3-minute, 4-minute range. So worthy album for me. Jeremy, finally to you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with worthy album.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah, flip of the coin, but yeah. I will say you mentioned earlier the whole presence of the United States, like talking about those types of songs, like later, especially in the mid '90s. If you like this album, I mean, obviously you now know of at least 2 albums in their catalog that are pretty good. The EP between, so Junior Citizen, check that out, and check out the EP Just Like You that came out I think before Junior Citizen, because it's I guess you could say similar, but similar is not really a fair thing to say, because I still think it's all unique. Like everything that they do is special on most of their albums. I don't generally go, oh, this sounds like that song that they did 3 albums ago. There's always something new and different. But there is the title track on Junior Citizen seems to be kind of in that vein of just pure silliness that the President of the United States did. Not like, it's not songs about like animals or goon buggies or anything like that. It's
Cans of fruit.
kind of like a rallying song. It's kind of like rallying the troops, like rallying their fans, kind of, I guess I could say it. But it kind of comes across as a song being about like them like kind of launching into, you know, they're like a group of people that are launching off into space for some sort of mission. They even give themselves like fake names in the song at one point. um I think one of them is referred to as, I'm assuming that's what happened, because one of them definitely has to be a nickname for somebody in the band as a joke, but except for Dr. Smith. Like one of them is Dr. Smith, which kind of ties into the Lost in Space feel.
I was going
of
to
the
say
whole
it's
thing,
Lost
I
in
guess.
Space.
Yeah. But and then the artwork also is just off the wall. Like the whole liner notes and everything. They even, one of the members is just called, I think he's just called Number 6, and it's Howie. He's the sixth drummer. So in the artwork, I think he's wearing a shirt that just has a number 6 on it. Which then just kind of poking fun at the fact that he's their sixth drummer, I thought was funny as well. But yeah, I mean, there's even New World Record. You know, it's just, it feels like it's a little bit more of a groove based album in a way. And I feel like they just were kind of in between where they were going next and where they were with this album. But all of them, you can find something to like. They might not all be as, you know, beginning to end consistent as this one. But I think you can find a lot of worthy albums in their catalog, more worthy albums than better EPs, put it that way.
And I know there was a big break between No More Songs About Sleep and Fire, and then, which was 2004, and then Grand Bargain in 2018. Do you know, are they in any way active as a band?
They still do shows here and there, and on their podcast, so Rick has his own thing, which is called Thoughts Detecting Machines, Thoughts Detecting Machines, which is just basically him. I mean, I think he has some other people guest on some things, but it's pretty much just him and some, you know, program stuff. And so he's been recording a lot under that, but that's kind of slowed down too, which makes me suspect that they might, if it wasn't for, I would hope that they would have done it already, because right now, leading into the election season, would have been the perfect time for them to do their next album. But maybe they're waiting to see if we have another presidency that inspires them to do a Grand Bargain type album again. It's tough to say, but I would be surprised if they haven't. I'm sure that Rick has songs that he has said these are only going to be poster children songs if we ever do them. And same thing with other people in the band. They're just like waiting for the next time to get together and work on stuff again. So I'd be surprised if another album doesn't come out in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, Rick and Rose have a long running podcast called Radio Zero, and there is there's a article or interview with them where the title is Indie Rock Microstars Talk About Music, Movies, and Politics. Microstars.
I like that.
I have a song where they refer to themselves as 0 stars. So I guess that's a little bit better.
Sure. Well, the folks at our Patreon, they agreed with us. 67% worthy album, 22% better EP, and 11% decent single, which we know where that came from. So overall, taking the majority, worthy album with 67%. Hopefully we'll see another win of 67% again in the future, and they won't have to write an album about it. That's my hope.
That's my hope too. We'll enjoy the back catalog.
Yeah. We don't need an angry response to a new administration. We want a smooth, quiet, nothing happen in administration, just showing up with their lunch pail. And
don't let that title track scare you though, on that new album. Don't let it scare you off. It's I'm not saying it's bad, but it's the first song and you think, oh wow, this whole album is going to be kind of angry and political. And there's a lot of political stuff on there, but it's not nearly as angry as that first track. It's a little bit more in line with what you would expect from from Poster Children. I do think that's a great opening to an album, and I'm sure that Steve Albini was probably like, "You guys got to open with this."
That's right. He produced that one.
He engineered it.
Oh, sorry. He's listed as the producer on Wikipedia, but he eschews the producer role because he's an engineer.
Right.
And we are saddened at his passing. Yes.
Yeah.
So, Jeremy, this was a great pick. I know you've talked on the Discord about having some challenging picks for us that we haven't always been on board with completely, but I feel like you hit a seeing eye double up the middle, and Jay's rounding third for the game-winning home run. Whatever.
Well, this one was recommended a couple times in the polls, and then I think one of their other records. So they've come up quite a few times. So it's good to finally get to talk about them.
Yeah. Have Criteria or the White Octave ever come up? Are those 2000s albums or 90s albums? I'm not even sure.
White Octave is 90s.
I don't know if that's ever been in a poll.
I don't
recall seeing either of them.
That was one of those records when we were in a band in the 2000s where people talked about it as if it like was some holy grail, because it was hard to track down the CD. Even then, it was hard to track down the CD. And I don't know if it ever got, I'm sure it probably got a re-release at some point.
Menergy is 2001.
Oh, okay.
And then Criteria is 2003, 6, and 9.
Okay. So it would have to
Good
be
thing
for the
you're doing
2000s episodes.
Good thing you're doing aughts instead of 80s.
Yeah.
Be able to get it in there at some point.
Well, we need some people to make some suggestions. If you want to make a suggestion for an aughts episode, you would have to join us at the DMO Union by going to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com, like Jeremy has done. He gets to suggest records not only for this podcast, but also for our aughts podcast, which is exclusive to our Patreon community. We do 6 episodes a year. We just put up a huge poll to pick our back half of 2024. And we're going to do one or very soon, the winner of the last poll. We're a little behind in getting them published, but we will have them all out by the end of the year. We didn't say we were going to do them once a month. We just said we'd do 6 in a year. If I publish 5 of them in the last week, that still counts. I'm not going to do that, but I'm just saying, because that'd be a lot of editing for me to do in 1 week, and I, quite frankly, would go insane. But if you want to be like Jeremy, like I said, go to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com, and you can chat over at our Discord. Lots of stuff always happening at the Discord. I'm trying to remember what we were discussing. Oh, there was the new John Davis track that came out. He's got a new solo record. Sounds like John Davis. Can't complain about that.
It's got some super drag vibes going on.
Mm-hmm. And with a lot of discussion around Depeche Mode because of that episode, which just dropped. And of course, we're always talking about nonsensical stuff in the off topic. So if you like your memes to be couchy, that's where you would go. I don't know how we've gotten to this point in our lives where we're discussing this. I feel like we're very unserious compared to where our parents were at this age, where we're trading memes about political candidates in discords. I feel like when my parents were in their about to hit 50, they were not as unserious.
Well, sometimes what else can you do but trade memes about the end of the world? I mean, that's
yeah.
That should be a book, trading memes about the end of the world.
I'm gonna write that down. Hold on.
Yeah, it's just every generation is just increasingly cynical and irreverent. I think just gets it's what else are you going to do? What else are you going to do when, you know, you can't even sit and be worried about your future or your kid's future? You know, it's like, it's not in my hands. I can only do so much. I can vote, but other than that, just throw some memes out, hope something reaches some news outlet and changes the world that way, maybe.
If you really want to feel how small you are, there is a documentary on Amazon Prime. It's just called like Everything. And it's about how scientists discovered the size of the universe. And they go back to like very early, like astronomers, just being able to see planets. And then like they get into basic math, which is called Euclidean math, which I know that now, but it's basically like 1 + 1 = 2, and triangles have 3 sides that equal a certain amount. And then you start to get into these other mathematicians that are like, well, what if we bend things?
Non-Euclidean mathematics.
Non-Euclidean,
really
Gaussian.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into like is it Edward Hubble? With the guy who the Hubble telescope is named after, like learning about, oh no, they used to think that this is crazy. They used to think that our like universe, that when you looked up in the sky, that the stars were like a shell around our universe, and they didn't move, and we were just inside this giant shell. like and somebody was like, no, that's not actually what's happening. There's a universe and it has defined edges, and then after that we don't know if there's anything out there. And then they said, no, beyond that there are other universes, and they're moving away from us, which means the universe itself
understandable
is constantly expanding in every direction all the time. And there's no, and then they figured out, well, what if it's expanding out, where did it expand out from? And that's where you get the Big Bang theory, which is you just like go backwards. Well, if it's all expanding out, if you push it back in, then you get this little, well, what happened before the Big Bang? Well, when there was nothing. And then your gummies start to kick in, and you're like, whoa, this is getting really heavy.
Well, where I would insert is like, if you reflect on how silly we sounded then, we sound just as silly now in terms of the confidence we have. I'm like, we've got it all figured out now. I mean, the people before that thought it was this way, though, they were silly and stupid. We know jack shit about shit.
Exactly.
So
we don't even know what's in the oceans.
Right.
There are things in the oceans. We've never seen them. We just assume that they're there. We're like, oh, well, there must be things down there. There's crazy stuff in the oceans that we have no idea. No idea.
We are tomorrow's flat earthers.
Yeah.
I was explaining the basics of quantum mechanics to my daughter, which for some reason they don't teach kids about quantum mechanics. I don't understand why. And she was just like, what are you talking about? I was like, no, there's entanglement. This is how this works. And like the observer effect, and explaining all these basic concepts of it. And she's like, that sounds like magic. I was like,
yeah.
Let's talk about spooky
it's something we know exists, but we barely understand it.
The fact that quantum mechanics is not taught in a Texas grade school is not shocking.
She could tell you all about the Alamo, though.
Right.
Yeah.
They're well educated on that.
Oh, yes.
Quantum mechanics, it'll eventually be on the wall right next to the 10 Commandments. Don't worry about it.
Right, exactly. The box newsletter, circling this back to what's actually we're supposed to be talking about. The box newsletter, because the universe is not a box. It is an endless, constantly moving, expanding, nebulous idea. The box newsletter is contained in a digital format, which you receive electronically in your email each week, that contains a release calendar of new music, books, documentaries, and such about 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant artists. And it's where our 80s metal podcast resides. That's right. Besides this podcast and our aughts podcast, we also do an 80s metal podcast with our friend Chip Midnight. Lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. Jeremy, I forgot to say it. Thank you for bringing this. Another excellent pick. Always bringing us stuff we haven't heard or vaguely familiar with. So maybe now that we've done 2 Poster Children albums and I've liked them both, I'll actually go and listen to the Poster Children before someone else suggests them the record.
Another thing to do that I could say to sell the Patreon memberships is I think I only really touched on maybe half of the Q&A that I did with Rick. So I'll just post the rest of this out on Discord.
Yes.
Nice.
Exclusive content to the Discord.
I'm no Chip Midnight. My questions are kind of dumb, but
we'll come
roll with it.
on. We can all strive to be Chip.
Strive, sure.
We can strive.
Never make it.
It's not about making it. It's not the destination, it's the journey.
The journey.
Yes. Like when we journey to other universes through our telescopes. Boom. Brought it back around. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.